Hey, Steve, let's start off with Peng Shuai. This is the third week we've talked about her, but for good reason. In this past week, there was another round of interesting, let's say, controversy between the WTA and the IOC, Olympic Organizing Committee. Take us through what happened this past week.
Well, I mean, look, the WTA is sticking by its players, and the WTA has said that it's going to do everything possible to protect her, and that when powerful people are suppressing the voices of women, sweeping allegations of sexual assault under the rug, then that is going to be a huge setback, and the WTA is not going to sit by and do nothing. And because the WTA has said Chinese officials have been provided the opportunity to cease censorship of her and the topic, to provide verifiable proof that she is free to speak without interference or intimidation, and to investigate, and they have not done it, they've pulled out of China until that changes. And this is the first time a business is going to cost themselves hundreds of millions of dollars to stick up to their principles.
And that's the key point, Steve, isn't it? That it is hundreds of millions of dollars. They have the year-ending WTA tournament, I believe, in China. It used to be here in Singapore. I've attended it in Singapore myself. So it is a lot of money that's being lost here. What kind of message will it send to other sports associations, for starters, because China is a huge market for all sports from football onwards, and will others follow suit here?
Well, this is what we've seen this start a bit in the United States about U.S. politics. And when LeBron James spoke out against Donald Trump and some of what he was doing, Laura Ingraham, a relatively famous right-wing political commentator in the United States, told LeBron James, she said, "Shut up and dribble." Right? That's what you do. We don't want to hear what you talk about politics. The Chinese government is saying the same thing to the WTA right now. They're saying that don't politicize sports. Stay out of our business. You just come here, you hit the ball. We'll watch your women hit the ball across the net, and then you make your money and you leave. And the WTA says, no, this is not politicizing sports. This is standing up for what we believe is right for our members. And will other businesses follow? That is going to be a real question. Bill Bishop, when a very famous China commentator, had lived in China for years, now has a great news subscription service I subscribe to, Cynicism. Bill said back in earlier on, he says, in many ways, it's harder for leagues to keep their souls, but also expand into China. And that is becoming more and more a case from a U.S. perspective, a Western perspective, and it's not going to be limited to women's tennis. It's going to expand into all sports, and then it's going to expand into the global business community.
Yeah, this is why, Steve, I find this particular case so fascinating, because I do think it's going to prove, history will show it was a landmark case, because this idea that the Chinese government this week have said you can't, sports cannot get involved with politics and vice versa. We can't say that anymore. Global sport has changed. Premier League footballers take the knee before every game as a protest. That in itself is a political statement against racism. They do this before every single game. Just last week, every English Premier League footballer wore the rainbow laces for LGBT rights, which has caused problems for broadcasters in the Middle East. There was an ex-footballer in the Middle East who came out against the LGBT statement, and there's been a fallout from that. The point I'm getting at, Steve, is I think it's naive now to keep suggesting, as the Chinese government have, that sports and politics can be separated. They just can't anymore, can they?
Well, it's sports and politics. It's business in politics. It's everything is now coming together, and we're seeing it driven not necessarily by governments, but by business leaders and by their employees and by their customers. And China is trying to, and has effectively shut this discussion down in China. I mean, you literally can't look up tennis and social media in China, right, let alone Peng by name. There was one person who tried to get around this on Weibo, the Chinese version of Twitter, referring to the WTA in Chinese as the Women's Off-Table Ping Pong Association. That made it for about an hour or two before it got shut down. So,
Steve, if I can just say, this plays into the global ESG, environmental, social governance movement. I guess to your point, to Neil's, companies are not looking the other way when it comes to everything now. And like it or not, we're not at 50 years ago or 60 years ago where governments just kind of did what they wanted. Boards of directors and investors and customers are demanding, in many cases, that companies, organizations do the right thing. Now, the right thing is, in quotes, is where we run into challenges, because, who decides what the right thing is. But, ESG, I think, and the movement over the past 2-3 years in that has absolutely played into this mindset that we're currently witnessing.
And it's the broadening of the stakeholder map that you were getting into there, Glenn, because now you can't just say, I'm going to comply with the law and therefore I get a free pass on everything else. And Ray Dalio, a very famous investor, just did an interview on CNBC, and he was asked about his investing into China and, how does this comply with what people see as human rights abuses and other things from a Western perspective in China. And Ray Dalio said, that's none of my business. It's what China does is China's business. What the U.S. does is U.S. business. U.S. isn't perfect. China isn't perfect. And he's getting blasted from everybody from taking that position that China is a strict parent when it comes to its people, and you accept that. That did not work. That did not go over so well for him. So when you do your stakeholder mapping as a business leader, your stakeholders and the people who you have to think about before you take actions, your investors, your customers, your employees and potential employees, media, civil society. It is a huge exercise, and that's all part of making sure you understand ESG, environmental social governance, from a business perspective, not just from a regulatory perspective.
Steve, the Chinese government, of course, has come out and said, this is ridiculous. She's fine. No problem. You've seen her on video. She's answered questions. But the IOC came under pressure this week after they did their video call with her. They didn't release the video. They didn't release a transcript. They just said, she's fine. We've talked to her. And that has led a number of people saying, look, the IOC is soft pedaling this because they don't want to mess up the Beijing Games come next February. Do we have any more insight in recent hours as to the IOC's stance on this? I mean, they've supported her being safe and her, et cetera, and all the other things that the WTA is, but they've taken a much lighter touch on this. I think that was actually the word they even used, was they're taking a light touch.
Well, I mean, the IOC has said that they have taken a very human and person-centered approach to her situation. And I don't know what a person-centered approach is exactly and how you can have a person-centered approach when you're talking about the issues that the WTA is standing up for, right? The rights of women, the rights to be heard, the rights for an investigation, the rights not to protect people in power against those who are more disenfranchised, even if it is a former two-time, world champion on the WTA tour and a former Olympian, that there's a huge power dynamic. So how does a person-centered approach work in that? I mean, I think that is kind of the Western question, is you can't have a person-centered approach. The IOC is obviously trying to balance business interests, its commitments to China, and then helping Peng out as well. They're having a tough time.
But is there a chance on this one, Steve, of the IOC being left behind? As Glenn rightly mentioned, you have to think about investors, you have to think about customers, because the power of social media now is bigger than the IOC. It's bigger than the Olympic movement, as we've seen everyone from Serena Williams to famous athletes around the world saying, where is Peng, where is Peng? And then IOC has a meeting, allegedly it was a 30-minute meeting between Thomas Bach, the IOC president, and Peng, and the allegations reportedly were not even mentioned once. I mean, this would be HR, PR 101 in any organization across the board. If a woman makes an allegation against a senior official, a senior employer, a man of power, a sexual allegation, and then you have a meeting about it and it's not mentioned once, what does it look like from the optics point of view?
I mean, like, the IOC is never been seen as an exemplar of standing up for individual rights.
Exactly.
This is so the business question for the IOC is, right now the sponsors have been, are still all there for the Olympics. And those are some of the biggest names in the world who are the sponsors. But now you see one of those sponsors, I believe, is Airbnb, has now come against an investigative report that it is listing properties in Xinjiang that are owned by sanctioned entities. And so this whole issue of human rights and business in doing what you're supposed to do in the West, but then complying with Chinese law and doing what you're supposed to do in China is very difficult. And that gets back to the Bill Bishop's point is, can you do both? Is it possible to have an approach like one country, two systems? And we saw how one country, two systems turned out for Hong Kong. Is that something that businesses are going to be able to continue an analogous model, which is basically what they're following right now?
Yeah. All right, Steve, we got to leave it there. Let's hope that we see some more resolution on that this week. Otherwise, we'll be talking about it on the 18th of December when next we see you.